I'm sharing this story anonymously for reasons that will become obvious later on. And before we get into this, I just want to preface this experience and warn everyone listening. This is probably going to be one of the most fucked up stories you've heard in a while. I was inspired to share this when I saw how poorly the release of the Epstein files was handled. Not to suggest that my story has anything to do with that, but to let young folks know that these sadistic, hellbound demons have been doing this sort of bullshit for a very long time, and they always pay off the right people to get away with it. And then guys like me are labeled conspiracy theorists. But the truth is that it's more convenient for people to buy into the lies. Anyway, this happened during the summer of 1987, on a sunny afternoon in the Sunshine State. I worked for the Coast Guard back in those days, but on that day, I was off duty, after working a string of 12-hour shifts pulling weakened boaters out of trouble. I was doing some fishing in my little Ranger boat. I had my cooler of beer, my fishing rod, and was listening to a baseball game over the radio. I eventually motored out past the markers into open water, then cut the engine off a few miles offshore, allowing the current to do the work. I wasn't getting any bites, but I was too angry at the Mets to care. There was no one out on the water that day. I fished around this area a few times before, but never in this particular section. I was pretty sure I was off the coast of some private property, but there was no signage to indicate so. So I carried on. I would say it was around 4, maybe 4:30, when I spotted something in the water, maybe 3/4 of a mile west. At first, I thought it was a freighter, or maybe a cruise ship, but as I drifted closer, I saw that it was a yacht, the kind you see tied up at the fancy marinas in Fort Lauderdale. The ones that make you wonder who on earth could afford them, except this one wasn't moving at all. And there was no anchor chain. It looked like it was just drifting. I throttled up to it, curious. Yachts this size just don't go adrift without someone noticing. Maybe there was engine trouble, or maybe there was a medical emergency. I grabbed my bullhorn. "Hello, is anyone there? Do you need assistance?" No one responded. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. I could see a name on the stern now. Serafina, in gold script. The deck looked deserted. I had an inkling that this could be an illegal drug transport vessel. We dealt with those a lot back in those days. But I figured even the drug cartels wouldn't want a yacht of this size drifting off the coast to be spotted by some asshole in a fishing boat. It was more likely that something happened on board, and the boat was either abandoned, or someone was below deck, incapacitated. I should have turned around, but I had spent enough years in the Guard pulling people out of bad situations to know that silence on the water usually means trouble. I eased my boat alongside and tied up to the platform, then climbed aboard onto the yacht's main deck. "Hello? Anyone aboard?" No answer. The yacht looked pristine, cushions tight, no cups or towels scattered around, no sign of recent use. The salon doors were open, so I stepped inside, keeping one hand on the knife on my belt. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I called again. Still nothing. The interior looked how you would expect it to. Cream leather, polished wood. Whoever owned this boat had some serious money. I then noticed a half-finished drink sitting on the bar. The ice was almost gone, and a pool of water was below it. Remembering this still gives me the chills, because it was the first indication that I wasn't alone. I moved toward a stairwell that led to the lower cabins. That's when I heard it. A low, wet sound. Not mechanical. It was like someone chewing something. My stomach dropped. I drew my knife. I had a .38 back on the Ranger, but I was too caught up in the moment to go back to get it. The sound grew louder as I eased down the steps. The lower corridor was dim. The doors to the guest cabins were all closed, except for one at the far end, where the sound was coming from. I rounded the doorway and froze. I could not believe what I saw. There was an older man, maybe late 60s, completely naked. He appeared to be wearing a pair of headphones that were connected to a record player behind him. He was kneeling on the carpet. In front of him was a boy. Couldn't have been older than 10. Most of his face was gone. The old man was eating him, making that wet sound. I like to think the boy was already dead, but I swear I could see his lower jaw moving, with his eyes wide open. The man's head then snapped up. His mouth was red, with strings of tissue hanging from his chin. Eyes wide, pupils blown. I recognized that look. He was on something. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled. I turned and ran. I still kick myself mentally for not burying that knife into that man's head. I ran across the salon, back out onto the deck. My heart was pounding as I vaulted for the rail. I yanked the Ranger's line free and shoved off hard. I then rammed the throttle forward. I was maybe 100 yards out when the first crack came. Sharp, flat, louder than the motor. I ducked instinctively, then glanced back. I could see someone on the yacht's deck, aiming a rifle. Another shot rang out. But fortunately, he missed again. I kept the throttle pinned, not looking back until the yacht was just a white speck against the horizon. My hand shook so bad, I could barely hold course. Back at the dock, I called it in on a payphone outside the marina office. First, local PD. Then, my watchmaster at the station. I told them everything, and they took it serious. 30 minutes later, I saw choppers combing the area. I gave my statement, giving every detail I could. I wanted this man to be found and arrested. I also felt overwhelming regret for not taking matters into my own hands. This is something that still haunts me to this day. I came face to face with pure evil, and I fled like a coward. Back then, I was naively patriotic and believed that the law holds people accountable, even if they have deep pockets. I know better now. A day later, I got the call. Not from the local PD, but from my own Master Chief. He told me to report to the office ASAP. I drove to the station with a knotted stomach. I could tell this was serious. Whatever he wanted to tell me, he wanted to do so in person. When I got there, he slid a single piece of paper across his desk. It was a typed memo. There was a classified stamp crossed out, but still visible. "The incident you reported has been handled." Handled how? Handled. The vessel was recovered. There were no bodies and no evidence of foul play. Official finding, mechanical failure. Accidental grounding later that night. Case closed. "But, sir, there was a kid. And the guy was..." "I know what you reported. And I'm telling you, that didn't happen." "That's bullshit, sir." He got up and closed his office door. "You're going to take some time off, and you're going to forget all about this. You mention this to the press, to anyone, and your time in the service ends tomorrow. Understand? Orders came down directly from the top this morning. I suggest you forget all about this and be grateful that you're not being arrested for trespassing. You were fishing in private waters." I was in shock, completely dumbfounded. The chief then took a seat directly next to me and spoke in a low voice. "Look, I like you, so I'm going to give it to you straight. They're going to make life hell for you and your family. For your sake and for theirs. Forget about this." I drove home that day, feeling numb. I sat in the driveway for a long time with the engine running. I can still hear it sometimes, that awful wet, chewing sound. The man's eyes looking up at me, not afraid, just annoyed that someone had interrupted him. I don't know who he was, but I do know this. He wasn't some drifter or junkie who stumbled onto a boat. He had money, connections, people who could make a crime scene vanish and threaten a Coast Guard man's career to keep quiet. I think about the kind of people who can do that, the kind who drift through the world, untouchable, indulging in things the rest of us couldn't even imagine, the kind that get protected when the rest of us will be locked away forever. I kept my mouth shut for almost 40 years, and I don't do much fishing these days. But when I do see a big white yacht in the water, I flip it off. When I went home for 3 weeks about a month and a half ago, my dad and I decided we should do a bit of night fishing. I'm not a huge fan of night fishing, or any sort of fishing, or my dad for that matter. Our personalities are way too similar, and if you leave us together for more than an hour, there may be blood left over by the time he and I are done playing several dozen rounds of fisticuffs between the stubborn arguing and shouting. Anyways, Dad decided to take me to this river up by our new house that they had just finished building. My mom and brother stayed behind while we made our way through the dark woods. Now my family lives in Oregon, and the river was about 1.5 miles from my family's property, over massive fallen trees and stumps that I could easily trip on. Not knowing the lay of the land, my dad merely scoffed at me and reminded me that city living makes you soft. He didn't use those words exactly, just something along those lines, like some stereotypical cowboy from a Western film. I blame the fact that I didn't know this area as well as he did, and things just spiraled downhill from there, and arguing broke out between us, making the peaceful night loud and chaotic. We didn't stop arguing the entire way down to the river, my father critiquing my less than Christian lifestyle, while I criticized his manner of parenting my 20-year-old autistic brother. By the time we got to the river, we finally settled into an awkward, tense silence as we got our gear out. I knew that this fight was far from over as I sat down on a fallen stump, freezing my ass off. I had lived in a warm climate for over a year, and honestly, coming out here was probably his way of punishing me for leaving the Pacific Northwest. We refused to talk to each other as our lights danced across the water. Then my dad suddenly stood up, his light landing on the other side of the river. There, on the other bank, stood a man, looking right at us. He wore a bright orange t-shirt and a pair of scraggly jeans. For the most part, he was pretty average looking, except for the machete that was hanging off his belt. My dad snapped at me to start packing up all of our things, and so I followed his command as my dad started shouting something at the man across the river. Their conversation was mostly lost to the roar of the white-capped river, but I could see the man making agitated sweeps with his hand every time I looked up. Their voices grew louder, and my fear grew with it. My father has never been one to carry protection in the woods, hence why I was born. This man was armed and possibly dangerous with that machete, and while we had a river between us, it was shallow and had plenty of places to cross. I had no doubts this man could be behind us in mere minutes. Had we wandered onto his property by mistake and just didn't know about it? "Drop the gear and let's go," my dad snarled at me as I took one last look up to see the man starting to walk in the water. My dad then put a firm hand on my shoulder and led me back into the woods toward our house. My dad is an ultra-marathoner. He runs like it's going out of style, and my mostly out-of-shape self probably wouldn't have been able to keep up. I couldn't hear if the man was coming after us. My heart was beating so loud in my ears, but I followed my dad so closely, I almost ran into him several times. Finally, we found our road and made a break back for my parents' house. As soon as we were through the front door, my dad had all the doors locked and was keeping watch out the windows, making sure no crazy men with machetes were creeping up to our house. Finally, when we figured out there were no men wearing orange t-shirts out there, we sat down and began to talk about our experience with my mom. We left out the part where we had been arguing, but told her everything else. We went to bed that night without apologizing. The next day, with the only gun he owned, my father and I walked back out into the woods after calling the police. They said that there was a man who enjoyed scaring people off the forest land, and that we shouldn't be too concerned about it. Feeling a bit sheepish, we went back to the place where we had left our gear, both of us apologizing for our lackluster behavior the night before. When we got back to what we believed to be the spot, we saw our fishing poles had been bent and the lines had been draped from tree to tree. The tackle box was gone. The good news is, me and my dad didn't fight again for the rest of my trip home. This went on for over the course of a year, with the last incident taking place in December of 2016. I used to own this green 1998 Toyota Camry. It was my grandmother's until she gifted it to my parents, who eventually gave it to me as my first car. It was nice and reliable. But I have this bad habit of letting my cars accumulate a bunch of stuff before cleaning them out. Since I still lived with my parents, they would use the car from time to time if they needed. One day, I noticed a bunch of fishing lines with hooks on them in the back of my car. On one of those rare occasions that I actually cleaned it out, a bunch of hooks were embedded into the upholstery, and more are between the creases on the seat. It takes me a while to get them all out, almost pricking myself several times while doing it. I have no idea how long they were there, as the last time I had cleaned my car out was months ago. At any rate, I'm annoyed. At first, I thought my dad had put them in there, as he had recently used this car to transport a bunch of old junk for a garage sale. But when I asked him about it, he told me that he's never seen any fishing hooks or lines in any of the old stuff of ours, and nobody in my family even fishes, so it wouldn't make any sense for us to have it. He's also the only other person that has used my car in the past year or two. I'm the kind of person who locks everything every night. I triple check my car doors, and if I'm even a little uncertain as to whether or not I locked up, I will go back to my car and check, despite any inconvenience. I also park it where I can see it from my bedroom window and hear if anyone is tampering with it, so I doubt anyone could have broken in, and I just assumed Dad missed it and didn't think any more of it. Until a month later, when I found even more fishing hooks in my back seat. At this point, I asked my dad about it again, but he figured that I was either pulling a weird prank on him, or someone is breaking into my car. I wonder why, though, they would break into my car, not steal anything out of it, and leave fishing hooks inside. It just didn't make any sense to me. To give you an idea about how weird this is, I live in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and even have a private Facebook group that started because of a drug house at the end of the street cropping up, though at this point it was no longer there. The group became sort of a neighborhood watch that always posts whenever something suspicious happens around here. So there isn't any neighbors I don't know for miles, and none of the ones I do know would do something this shady. Again, without any explanation or clear motive, it fades into the back of my mind as the days and weeks pass. I eventually get a new job selling mattresses, as I had been unemployed focusing on school for a while. I move out of my parents' house to go live with my girlfriend, and this is where things turn from weird to extremely unsettling. One night, we decide to go to a nearby store to get something to make food with. When I notice in my back seat, there was a bunch of fishing lines and hooks again. Startled, I looked around for any sign of anyone being nearby. I told my girlfriend to go back into the house, and I sit up and stare at my car from our bedroom window until morning comes. I don't see anyone or anything. That morning, I get ready for work, and my girlfriend gets ready for college courses, and we leave. The store I was working at during this time had this weird L-shaped design to it, with two separate entrances and a cafe taking up the space in between them. There was one entrance that was easily visible from the front desk, and another that you would have to get up and go see. As I was closing up for the night after the last incident, I go to turn off the open signs, and see in the center of the obscured hallway an entire roll of fishing line coiled up, with part of the line leading to the door where a pile of hooks sat. I had no customers that day and didn't hear the alarm going off. I then noticed that someone had turned the door alarms off, but neither I nor my only coworker had ever tampered with that device before, and it was behind the front desk. I was shaking. Someone had been stalking me and leaving these hooks and lines for me to see, but I had no idea what to do. Call the police? Other than the fishing lines and hooks, there was really nothing to trace back to anyone. My store had no security cameras. Corporate would never agree to install them. I figured the best I could do would be to not appear as frightened as I was, in case whoever was doing this was watching and recording me. I thought that if seeing something like this didn't make me go about my day differently, and I wouldn't give whatever reaction this person was looking for, they would just give up and go away. For several more months, I would find fishing lines and hooks in my car, despite it being locked, and my parents, being the only people with extra keys, being much too busy with the construction of their new house and their jobs to take time out of their day to prank me. Once or twice, I would leave notes in my car asking whoever it was why they were doing this, and to please stop. I would find the notes were gone whenever the lines and hooks reappeared, but never got a response. Eventually, after a series of misunderstandings and disagreements with my girlfriend's family, I decided to move out of my girlfriend's house and rented out an apartment with a couple of my friends until my parents' new house could be completed. The very last time I had an encounter with the lines and the hooks, I came home from work to find them strewn about the living room. Stuff had been knocked over, and a few things were broken. However, nothing was taken. My friend, his girlfriend, and their baby were gone at the time, so no one was there when this happened, except for the cats, who were absolutely spooked and wouldn't come out from under the bed for hours. To this day, I still don't know what this person wanted, why they were stalking me in the first place, or what the fishing lines and hooks meant. No one that I know is into fishing at all, and I don't go out of my way to make enemies or cross people. I honestly don't know if this person was someone I knew or a stranger who was very good at covering their tracks. What I know for sure is that I will have anxiety for the rest of my life over this, and I routinely stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning, because in addition to several other traumatizing experiences, this has made every bump in the night a potential threat for me. It's been about 10 years since I've seen anything more from this person, but instead of feeling reassured that it's finally over, I feel more uneasy that someone has followed me through the many changes in my life. Anyways, I hope you enjoy listening. I'm shaking as I type this out. I haven't really talked about it in great detail to anyone, because simply describing it makes me feel like a lunatic. Not only that, but I don't want to worry my friends and family when there's nothing that they can do about it. This will likely be a mystery that will never be solved.